I uncovered a rigid framework that all movies follow, with no exceptions. This video will break down how even Baahubali the beginning adheres to Hollywood's storytelling secret. Check out the videos tab to see if your favorite movie has been exposed. We start, as always, with a focus on our protagonist, specifically their personality, their inner conflict, and their situation. Shivagami escapes with an infant prince, embroiled in political turmoil, and Sanga adopts the infant as her own, ordering the cave sealed from where he came. Yet Baahubali daydreams of climbing the mountain, drawn toward his true home. Next, we examine where, why, and how our protagonist exists in their world, with a focus on why they don't quite fit in. Sanga prays to Shiva in hopes of taming her son's wild spirit, while Baahubali argues for a loophole to ease the effort of his mother, and he proves himself immensely stronger and that much different than anyone else in the tribe. Then a brief event happens, one that's never happened before. It's destined to lead all the characters away from their status quo. A mask of a human face falls from the top of the mountain, proving that something grander does exist up there. Which leads us to examine the effect of that something new to the status quo, specifically what's different now and what remains the same. Despite her unease with the mask, Sanga is happy that her son is too distracted to climb, although Baahubali is more obsessed than ever with what lies beyond the clouds. He chases this new obsession higher than he's ever climbed before. Then he returns to the top of the waterfall, his true home. We move along to the discovery that things are less than ideal, or else we explore how badly things are. Both scenarios are common. Avanthika is chased by a horde of men, outnumbered and outmatched. Then Baahubali witnesses an ambush from the wrong side, introducing him to the political intrigue. A tribe continues their losing fight despite their repeated losses, and they are the originators of the mask that led him home. Next, our characters dedicate their effort to a specified goal, and this is always narrower in scope than what the third act will demand. The tribe needs more warriors and hopes to outsource from other kingdoms, while Kattappa defends the royal family as an honor-bound slave. Then Baahubali marks Avanthika, entwining their fates with matching tattoos. Then we run through a brief checklist of the main story elements that we can expect during this journey. The mission to rescue Queen Devasena, the complications of Baahubali's mere presence, the breadth and violence of Mahishmati under current leadership, Bala's raw power and fierceness as a warrior, and of course, complex political loyalties. Which brings us to the brief event that launches our characters into the wild jungle of the second act. It's also called the oh shit moment. Bala will only release Devasena by death, calling out Kattappa's unwillingness to follow that particular order. Oh shit. We follow our characters as they discover the new rules and expectations of their journey. These are always distinct to the narrative at play. Devasena finally appears on screen, and we learn of Bala's jealous rage. And Kattappa struggles to balance moral duty and slave duty, trying to free the queen. Yet she refuses and chooses captivity until such time as her prodigal son returns. Next, our characters showcase their ability to grow and progress, and this is typically an external or physical beat rather than internal or emotional. Avanthika deduces the source of the tattoo and sets a trap, and Baahubali gives her a shoulder tattoo, further entwining their fates. Then she tracks him down, and they finally, officially, violently meet. Then our characters face legitimate and understandable reasons to deviate from their stated convictions, agendas, or desires. Avanthika sees herself outside of her warrior persona for the first time, and so quickly falls in love, her heart no longer dedicated solely to the mission, while Bala prepares for a large celebration, ramping up tensions for if, or rather when, things go horribly wrong. We endure the anxiety as our characters face an escalation of problems and complications. Avanthika doses her new lover to keep him from following. Then she gets captured by roving soldiers, defenseless beneath a rope net. Baahubali runs in and whoops everyone's asses, but he's recognized by a name he's never heard before. Then he causes a snowy avalanche to fight back against an army. Next, our characters evolve internally or emotionally, and they do this by using elements of the plot or story which they've gathered and learned so far. Baahubali uses brute strength to make a getaway instead of barreling into battle. Then Avanthika explains the mission so he can take over, and Devasena senses the return of her son, and she rejoices. Then our journey-weary characters come to terms with their ongoing struggles. Moments and elements of the first act are used to gauge their progress. Baahubali manipulates a massive statue, more impressive than the Act 1 idol. Then the slaves chant his name in prayer, more voices than Sanga in Act 1. The Mahishmati people celebrate hope as a contrast to their Act 1 misery. And even Devasena stands tall and proud, unlike her defeated Act 1 intro. Then Sanga orders the cave to be uncovered, undoing her Act 1 command, which results in a brief event that strikes at our protagonist's core conflict. The tribe accepts Baahubali as the outsourced warrior to take over the mission, and they begin to plan their next move. And there's no turning back from here. We receive needed answers alongside our characters, which relate to both their external journeys and their internal conflicts. Bala is threatened by the Baahubali chant and looks to crush all dissent. Then Devasena meets her son, who both feel an instant connection. Next, our characters complete their narrow scope objective, yet discover that their victory is shallow or altogether meaningless, and must complete a wider scope objective. Baahubali strikes off her chains, marking her as his conquest. But she's not fully rescued just yet. He proves himself all the warrior help the tribe needs. But Kattappa is a better warrior still. Kattappa defends the prince against attack, but he's fighting against the true prince unaware. Then our characters face an existential conflict that wounds their sense of self and identity, or their physical journey. Baahubali kills the prince and faces the full wrath of Kattappa, but all the people kneel before him instead, upending his entire identity, and he accepts that it all might be true and listens to Kattappa. We celebrate with our protagonist in light of an undeniable win, which is always related to the rebirth in some way. Kattappa reveals the full background of the current political intrigue, and he admits that both Bala and Baahubali 1 were of equal worthiness to rule. Next, our characters suffer a grand loss. This is always connected to their newfound inability to quit their journey. An advisor turns coat and steals military secrets, which leads to Bala taking his opportunity to kill Baahubali 1. Then we experience a thematic freefall, as the main story elements are ramped up and thrown into upheaval. Kattappa's mere presence is enough to save the life of Baahubali 1, and an army plans to invade the city for their own conquest. Then a contest is announced to decide the future king once and for all, which forces us into a brief event that robs our protagonist of seemingly any hope of success. Baahubali 1's uncle sets him up for failure by allocating the best weapons to Bala. We watch our characters realize that they cannot return to their first act selves, and they turn to face the wider scope objective. War is upon Mahishmati, and the crowd roars for Baahubali, not Bala. Then Kalakaya threatens the queen, ensuring there would be no mercy in this battle, while the soldiers and the city set up their defenses. Next, our characters use the major swings of the story and their personal journeys to move towards the climax. Mahishmati archers attack with a barrage of arrows, like they did to train Baahubali 1. and he catches the enemy in a big net, like they did to Avanthika. He sets fire to the cloth, like how his son will in the palace. Then he and Bala prove their strength in battle, like they did in their trials. Then the final confrontation plays out between our protagonist and characters against the antagonistic force. Both men charge after Kalakaya to claim the crown for himself, but Bala mows down innocent people, a preview of his brutal reign. Then the invading army breaks through Kattappa's defenses, which culminates in a brief moment where our protagonist finally, and oftentimes metaphorically, overcomes their place in the Act 1 status quo. Baahubali 1 becomes the rallying voice of hope in an otherwise obvious defeat, which will resonate down to his son. We experience the direct aftermath of the climax. This can give our characters a moment to reflect on the situation, or else wind down the action with a coda. Kattappa and the city defenses rally back to position, which frees Baahubali to rejoin the hunt for Kalakaya and the final victory. Next, we touch base with additional characters, typically to contrast them against the new status quo. Kalakaya is defeated, and his army begins to scatter. But Bala lands the killing blow, claiming the throne as his own. Shivagami makes her final proclamation as queen to skip over Bala, and his uncle seethes from the betrayal, rebellion on his mind. Then we conclude with a tight focus on our protagonist, specifically to contrast them against how we met them at the opening. Baahubali 1 is celebrated as king by the people, which repeats again 25 years later when his son receives the same honor. Oh, and cue the most epic cliffhanger in cinematic history. Do you think you know one that's better? Let me know in the comments. And there you have it. Baahubali The Beginning fits perfectly into Hollywood's storytelling secret, and it demonstrates that even if it's only the first half of a tale, each individual movie still follows the pattern. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you should totally check out my House of the Dragon video. Both are deep dives into Shakespearean-like royal tragedies, both with a fun and fantastical twist. And please, take care of yourselves out there, and I'll talk at you next time.